So we follow that with salt today.
Yes.
And usually our salt segments are a little bit lighter, but not today. It's on something that's incredibly important, and it just shows you how handling a pandemic through a capitalistic lens is the worst way to handle a pandemic. And nothing makes that clearer than the uneven way in which this vaccine is going to be distributed. So let's get right to it. You ready, Nando?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So questions of inequality and the consequences of capitalism are front and center when it comes to this pandemic, as the FDA has approved, by the way, Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine for emergency use authorization. Now, that's good news. That's something worth celebrating about. But as David Dayen writes in the American Prospect, there's a serious concern that rich countries are hoarding the vaccine and making it impossible for the developing world to access. There's a proposal before the World Trade Organization to suspend all patent rights on coronavirus vaccines due to the exceptional nature of the pandemic, and the United States, UK, EU, and other nations are blocking it despite a majority of nations in support. The successful vaccines we have were all developed with, and this is something that's very common, by the way, were all developed with at least some public funds and buoyed by public purchasing commitments. So the rich nations are blocking universal access to the public who paid for the vaccine once will have to pay again, or pay twice. Again, that's something that Americans are definitely experienced with. I mean, we fund the research and development of all sorts of pharmaceutical drugs, and then they turn around and they price gouge us. But really, the heart of this issue is that there will be uneven distribution of this vaccine, which is, again, the worst way to handle a worldwide pandemic.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't stay in one country. And by the way, even if it did, even if this was an illness that we can somehow contain in one country, why would we be okay with not having equal distribution of this vaccine so everyone around the world can combat it? It's just, it's terrible and disgusting.
It's absolutely maddening because it's in our interest, right? You know, the more people that are vaccinated, the better. That's how it works, right? You know, that's how you kill the virus. And it reminds me of a couple months ago, there was a raft of stories in the New York Times and things like that were like, the Russians and the Chinese are spying on our efforts to like develop a vaccine to like steal, the research that we're doing on the vaccine. And I'm like, why aren't we just giving it to them? Why don't we should just give it to them?
Yeah, totally.
They just give them all the research. They should publish all the research, basically for all to see, because like it's in our interest to share this kind of thing. Like if there was more labs working on it, more people working on it, we'd get there quicker, and if they just published the all the information about the vaccine, it would allow all kinds of labs and things like that all over the world to manufacture it themselves and be able to distribute it more widely, more effectively, and more broadly, which is in our interest, right? The only rationale for limiting it is money. It's the only thing. Yeah. It's the only rationale. And for years, people have been telling us that these patents are just necessary to spur innovation. That the only reason why someone would take the time to dedicate years of their life to develop something like this is if they had the potential of like bajillions of dollars in profit at the end of it. And that's just fundamentally untrue. And beyond that, it limits the innovation for things like pandemic vaccines, because we've known about coronaviruses for years now. Like this is not the first coronavirus. This is COVID-19 or whatever, and we could have been spending resources to develop a vaccine, but because the potential returns on a coronavirus vaccine are so uncertain, meaning that like there has to be a global pandemic for you to really make money off of it, then there is no incentive for people to actually go and develop it. We had this technology, we had the knowledge that this was coming. Had there been a non-profit motive, mechanism to develop this kind of thing, we would have been developing vaccines for years now. And we would have just, as soon as the coronavirus hit, we'd be like, oh, there we go. Just fire up the vaccine. No problem. Instead, we have what we have because the for-profit system is not capable of planning in this sort of way, in planning in a way that is in the interest of everyone, that has long-term thinking, all of these things. So this is just the latest example of that. Like the fact that once we have a vaccine that works, the fact that we're not just giving out that information to everyone, every single government in the world, like the UN, like through something like the UN or whatever, is just, it's mind-boggling. It's just the complete upside down world.
Yeah, it is. And, David Dayen addresses that as well, because, the New York Times asked some of these pharmaceutical companies to respond to the unequal way that the vaccine will be distributed across the world. And then, as Dayen writes, we should have been investing massive amounts of money we should have been investing massive amounts of money all for vaccine production and still should, refashioning plants to produce it. Patents are one reason why it's unlikely to happen. Even if the companies license out production, it will be done in limited ways to increase prices and profits. So it goes to what you were saying, Nando, how, if you're functioning under this profit-driven motive, well then, another way to think about it is why we have so few hospital beds, right? Yeah. Because it costs money to have enough hospital beds for something like a pandemic. And so it's all about cutting costs, increasing profits, even if it puts us in a uniquely awful position to combat with a national and global pandemic. So Moderna was also asked, what are you guys going to do? How is this all going to work? And they said, well, we won't enforce. We're not planning on enforcing our patent, but we're also not going to share detailed information about how we develop the vaccine. But why? Yeah. Why not?
Why
it's
not?
Just,
Why not?
It's because they want to profit. That's really what it is.
And
that's why, the whole notion of Operation Warp Speed is, hey, pharmaceutical companies, we're going to pump money, in this effort to find a vaccine. We're going to help pay for the research and development. And in return, we'll be able to secure a certain amount of, doses of this vaccine. And again, that also puts various countries at a disadvantage as well. So again, this is a global pandemic, and we need to have a global mindset in combating it and not think of this as rich countries versus poor countries or middle-income countries.
Yanis Varoufakis wrote a book called, and it wasn't related to this specific issue, but the title of it is something that I think about a lot, called "And the Weak Suffer What They Must," because that is just happens over and over and over again. And this is just the latest example of it. Some estimates show that that parts of the global south, especially sub-Saharan Africa, won't be fully vaccinated till 2024 at the earliest, with the current model. Jesus. So it's crazy.